The Chinese government is denying NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's claim that it asked the league to fire Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey. Morey posted on social media in support of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong earlier this month. The tweet then set up an international controversy and created sharp divisions in both countries. Silver said that the financial fallout from the league's rift with China has been substantial. China's canceled some broadcasts of NBA games in the country. New York Times reporter Sopan Deb joins me now. Sopan, having the Chinese ask Silver to fire Daryl Morey, and he said he's not going to even face consequences at this point. Where do you see this headed?
Well, I mean, Adam Silver himself said this week at the Time 100 Health Summit that he doesn't know. He said the games aren't back on in China at this point. And what's interesting about this is that the NBA has targeted China for international expansion going back decades, all the way to the 1970s. And so this has all been such a shocking experience, I think, for the league. But, I mean, Silver said it himself. He doesn't know what the future of the sport or whether the NBA will be invited back to China or whether the NBA even wants to go back to China at this point. He said that we don't know is the short answer to your question.
The NBA, this league has been known for being very progressive. Why are they not woke when it comes to China?
Well, I think Silver would say that, that one of the things he said this week was that he was surprised at the coverage back home. Because from his vantage point, the league stood behind Daryl Morey and stood up for free speech. It's just that from his perspective, it's not the league's role to, what he used the word adjudicate the issues that Daryl Morey brought up.
But they've taken on a lot of social justice issues without
They have. And when you brand yourself as a league that encourages social activism, you open yourself up to the criticism when you don't weigh in on something. You saw that last week when Steve Kerr declined to comment on the China situation. Steve Kerr is a very outspoken coach, and when he came to be asked about China, he said, "I don't know enough about this to talk about it," and then he ended up being mocked by President Trump as a result. Look, I don't know how reasonable it is let's say you are a black athlete and you're very passionate about gun violence because it affects your community quite a bit because of unarmed police shootings of unarmed black men. I don't know how reasonable it is to ask players to weigh on every single geopolitical issue out there. However, LeBron James took it one step further, right? He actually blamed Daryl Morey for the mess. And so that was where the criticism for LeBron James came in, right? And so,
were you surprised at how fierce, at one point when this broke out, they're like, well, why doesn't LeBron come out and say something? He should weigh in. And then he finally weighs in, and he got this swift backlash for weighing in on this.
So there were two aspects to the criticism for LeBron James. The one was him declining to criticize the Chinese government. But the second was he took it one step further by saying Daryl Morey was misinformed about the situation and when he sent out the tweet. And then he later walked that back to say that Daryl Morey was not informed about the ramifications of sending out that kind of tweet when the players were abroad. What was so interesting about that, and frankly very surprising to hear LeBron say, is that his blame was of Daryl Morey, not of the authoritarian government in China. And, he suggested that player safety was at stake, and, but in the initial statement, he suggested finances were at stake. So the thing is, if safety is an issue, then there's a question to be raised about whether the league should be in business with a country in which its player safety are at issue if someone speaks out against the Chinese government. And so those are all open questions, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
What are you watching for at this point?
Well, I mean, Adam Silver said this week the games aren't back on the air in China. It'll be interesting to see whether the de-escalation, if there is a de-escalation. In the last couple days, I mean, look, the games...
Do we know what the Chinese want in all of this?
They've suggested that they want Daryl Morey fired.
But beyond that, how do you get them to walk off this ledge?
We don't know, right? We know that the games occurred last week. After all the saber rattling, the games were not broadcast by Chinese state-run media. We know that the games happened. We also know, per the New York Times reporting, that the government went out of its way to de-escalate the situation at the end of last week. The state-run media outlets weren't really supposed to criticize the NBA that much. So we know all of that happened. Now, what happens in the next couple months? What happens if players decline to return to China? We don't know. We do know this week that D'Angelo Russell, who's not quite one of the top stars in the league, but he's a very good player. He's in the process of signing a lucrative shoe deal with a Chinese company. So my guess is that this continues to de-escalate. That's just a question of what de-escalation looks like. We just don't know what that is yet.
All right, Sopan Deb, thank you very much for joining us, Sopan.
Thanks for having me.